I got into a car accident and told my BF I was pressing charges, but he warned me to be careful because he's representing the other guy in court. Okay, so around 10 days ago, I, 25 female, got into a car accident which absolutely wasn't my fault. The car was parked outside a friend's house, and I was sitting in the car waiting for her to show up. I was scrolling on the phone when all of a sudden another car crashed into mine from the back. The impact of that was really bad, and unfortunately, I ended up spraining my neck. I suffered from a severe spinal injury because I'd fallen off a ladder around 5 years ago, and this collision just aggravated that. The car crash led to a ligament in my neck being torn, and I've been in severe pain since then. I couldn't get out of my car to confront the driver of the other car, but as soon as my friend heard the crash, she'd come running out of the house and immediately called 911. When they arrived, we were both rushed to the hospital, and while nothing happened to the other guy, I ended up in a cervical collar. I wasn't too worried about my car since insurance would take care of that, but I did press charges against the guy who hit me. I didn't know what he was on since my car was literally parked, and the street we were on was wide enough to drive by without hitting anyone, so it was insane that he crashed right into my car. Because he'd been drinking, I knew that because when he visited me in the hospital room, he was still reeking of alcohol but had tried to cover up the smell with a disgusting mix of perfume and disinfectant. I told the police that I wanted to press charges that day itself. But the guy who hit me, I'll refer to him as Chris for the sake of clarity, was very well connected, and the DA refused to acknowledge it as anything other than an accident. They even tried to gaslight me into believing that I was parked in a really weird spot, and Chris had just swerved to avoid hitting a cat and had unfortunately ended up crashing into my car. I later found out that Chris was related to a really wealthy businessman, probably his nephew or something, I'm not sure, but anyway, that was how he managed to dodge the law. The car would be taken care of by my insurance company since I'd been in an accident, and I had all the proof, and the police report said so as well, but I wasn't satisfied with just that. This Chris guy had literally hit my car head-on and was most definitely drunk, so he owed me a lot more than a weak apology. There was also the issue of my healthcare, because I had to bear the entire cost of my visit, and trust me, it was an insane amount since I had to get some tests done, an x-ray, and I had to pay for the collar, plus medicines, and all of it came up to almost $22,000. My insurance wouldn't cover all of it since I didn't have to stay overnight, and neither did I have to spend 24 hours. I run my own small-scale bakery business, and I can afford to live nicely. I have a small apartment of my own, and I can afford rent, gas, electricity, water, and all the other essentials, and I can even afford to splurge once in a while. But the hospital bill was huge, and I absolutely cannot just afford to drop that sort of money without disrupting my budget for the month. And I can't exactly skimp on anything else either. I still have to pay my bills and buy groceries and stuff that I need for my bakery business. Also, it was just so infuriating that some drunk guy could drink and drive, hit my car, send me to the hospital, put me in excruciating pain and discomfort for the next God knows how many days, and still just get away with it because of his connections. So I decided to sue the guy, and since my boyfriend, 29 male, is a lawyer himself, my first choice was obviously him. That was a week ago, and we were having dinner when I told him about this. He got really uncomfortable when I told him about it and said that I should just drop it because it wouldn't be worth it to go after someone like Chris. I was taken aback by his attitude towards this, since he could see that I was in a lot of pain and knew that I'd had to spend a bomb on healthcare, and yet he wanted me to drop it. We got into a fight over it, and he told me that he was too busy to represent me in such a petty fight, which was just so hurtful and made me rethink my entire relationship with him. We've been together for only 6 months, but I've known him for a year and a half, and he's been my go-to person ever since we became friends. The way he behaved just didn't sit right with me, and even though I knew he was well respected in his field, I'd never imagined that he'd make me feel so small. I was actually aware of the difference in our income and position in society, but I tried my best not to feel inferior. Maybe being a baker wouldn't make me as wealthy as he aspired to be, and maybe it wasn't an important career, but I did what I loved, I had fun doing what I do, and most importantly, I didn't rely on my boyfriend for money. So he had no right to make me feel that way. I didn't speak to him after that because I was very hurt by what he'd said, so I approached a cousin of mine who just started out, and she was more than happy to help me file the petition against Chris. I didn't tell my boyfriend about any of this and had made up my mind to break up with him by the end of this week because he'd been really disrespectful, and I wasn't going to stand for it. But before I could call him, he decided to contact me yesterday. Chris was notified of the litigation process, and apparently, he'd hired my boyfriend to represent him in court, and he called me to warn me. He said I needed to be careful because I'd be up against a really good lawyer, so my case needed to be airtight. He even suggested that I stop the proceedings and settle out of court because if I did go ahead, I was destined to lose. I knew that this was just the other guy's way to play mind games with me and intimidate me into backing off, but it wasn't going to work. I did feel bad about the way my boyfriend was acting, though. For some reason, he thought this was funny. I was already hurting, not just physically but also emotionally, and that was enough to send me over the edge. So I told him it was a good thing that we were already in court because now I could dump him since it had turned into a conflict of interest for me. After saying that, I disconnected the call, And since I still wasn't feeling satisfied with what I'd done, I decided to call his sister up and tell her what he was up to. His sister and I are really close and have been for 5 years. We became friends in college, and after we graduated, she invited me to her house for Thanksgiving dinner one year, which is where I met my boyfriend. I told her all about what he'd done and the fact that he was about to defend a guy who's obviously been drinking and driving, knowing that his family would be all up in arms about it. They're all really into activism and are very strict about the causes they support, but my boyfriend doesn't really care. It always felt strange to me, but now I guess he's just not a very socially conscious guy, and I just wasted half a year of my life trying to be with someone who had no principles and would do anything for money. He's constantly at odds with his father, who's also an ex-lawyer but is active in the circuit and usually finds out what cases his son chooses through someone who knows someone, so my boyfriend can't exactly hide anything from his family either. His sister was also not on board with what he'd done and the way he was behaving, so she promised me that she'd look into it and make sure he apologized to me. She couldn't guarantee that he'd back out of the case, but she said that she'd make sure he was sorry for making me feel small and being arrogant. She told me that he had already not been on good terms with his family for a while now, and what I told her had just made it very clear to her that her brother was going down the wrong path and she couldn't take it. She thanked me for telling her and even advised me to dump him because he'd lost sight of what was important because of how ambitious and greedy he'd become. She even seemed pleased when I told her that I'd already left him, so that was how bad his relationship with his family was. Now I can't say I'm surprised, since his family has always tried to be ethical, and his sister would constantly complain about the kind of people my boyfriend would choose to defend in court just because it paid well. I didn't like it much either, but I tried to stay out of it as much as I could since I didn't think it was my place to talk about how he worked and what clients he represented. He didn't talk about my work, so I didn't want to overstep my boundaries either. But this time, I was involved directly, and he'd insulted me far too much for me to keep it quiet anymore. Within half an hour of my phone call, my boyfriend started calling me relentlessly. I decided to answer him after almost 10 missed calls, and he immediately started apologizing for the way he'd behaved and said that he'd just been joking earlier. I told him that I wasn't going to forgive him because he'd really hurt me, and I also told him that now his family was also aware of the situation, so he could expect a call from his parents soon enough as well. That's when things got bad, and now I think I might have been an a-hole for getting his family involved. He told me that I had no right to speak to his family no matter how hurt I'd been. They'd already been hounding him to work for better clients, and now it was about to get worse just because of what I'd done. He was really unhappy about my decision to speak to his sister and said that he was relieved that we were no longer together so now he wouldn't have to hold back in court and would make sure I didn't get anything out of this. I hung up after that and blocked him, but I've been really worried ever since. We're supposed to appear in the local small claims court, and I know it's not a very high-profile case. I've only filed a claim of $5,000, so I think I'm owed that because I'll definitely have to visit the hospital in the future as well for my neck after this. I'm still worried that I might lose because my boyfriend is a good lawyer from what I know and rarely ever loses. Also, I think I might have overstepped my bounds and really shouldn't have told his sister like a tattletale. He is a 30-year-old man after all, fully capable of making his own decisions, so maybe he's right and I really was out of line. Now I'm considering just cutting my losses and apologizing to him. I don't know if that'll solve anything, but I can at least try. So should I do it? Either for dumping my boyfriend and telling his family that he's representing someone who is certainly guilty? Update 1. Hey, so I decided not to apologize to my boyfriend because I was not wrong. I read all the messages here, went through the comments on my post, talked to my parents and a few friends of mine, and I really thought about this long and hard. There's just no conceivable way that I'm in the wrong here. He messed with me, so I messed with him, tit for tat. And if he wasn't in the wrong here, he wouldn't be getting so defensive either. So it's clear who has a guilty conscience in this situation and who is trying to hide it by talking a big game and being overconfident. He might be a skilled lawyer, but I have the truth on my side, and I have full faith in myself and my cousin, and that's all I need anyway. So he can say whatever he wants, but it's not going to faze me. I also found out that this Chris guy actually went to high school with my boyfriend. They have a couple of friends in common. I guess that explains how he seemed to know who I was talking about when I mentioned Chris earlier. His sister was actually the one who told me about this, and it all finally made sense. All of them went to the same high school, and she knew that Chris was an exceptionally spoiled and entitled brat who'd grown up to be nothing but a wastrel. He partied his way through life, and now, in his late 20s, he was still struggling to find his footing at a job and was a high-functioning alcoholic. It just pissed me off to know that this guy still had a license and a nice car despite his alcoholism just because he was related to the right people and was rich enough to get away with whatever he wanted, while I still had my car in the repair workshop, had to wear a collar so that my neck would heal, and had to take painkillers every other day just to be able to work. It was so unfair already, and my boyfriend choosing to represent this idiot instead of me was the cherry on top. I guess some people really do think money comes over morals, but it's okay, that just tells me what kind of person he is. His sister also told me that they got into a huge fight over this with my now ex-boyfriend when his dad decided to confront him about what he was up to. He put his foot down and told him that he could either back out of this and choose not to defend this Chris guy, or his family would sever ties with him. That led to a lot of drama, but eventually, my ex decided to step back and cut his parents off, because he was getting paid a hefty amount to defend Chris, and there was no way he was letting that go. He wouldn't even choose his own family over money, so I'd been really damn stupid to think that he'd choose me over money. At least I know where I stand now, and so does his family. We're supposed to meet in court tomorrow, and I'm nervous, but I also know that I'm being honest here and he's not, and that just strengthens my faith in myself. Also, the fact that even strangers on the internet are on my side on this one speaks volumes about who's right and who's wrong. Hopefully, the judge will also be able to see that, and we'll be able to settle this. Update 2. So, this is the night before the hearing, and my ex just sent me a message from a different number saying that there's still time, and I can back off even now. He said that his client is willing to pay me the $2,000 plus some more and settle out of court, but I'm not okay with that. I want that guy to acknowledge that he screwed up royally and pay me no less than $5,000. I'm not even being greedy right now, I just think that's what I'm owed. $2,000 was what I had to spend only on the day of the accident, and there are more medical bills to cover because I'll have to get medicines, consultations, and physiotherapy to properly heal from this incident. I've been suffering from backaches almost daily, and it's affecting my work as well. This is why I'm not willing to settle for anything less than $5,000, and I'm sure that it's completely fair and reasonable. I don't even know what the fuss is all about, honestly. He's super rich, so why can't he just drop $5,000 for an accident that he caused? It just doesn't make any sense. It's not my concern anyway, so I just blocked the other number as well, and I'm going to try and fall asleep soon so that I don't have to entertain my ex's attempts to contact me and throw me off my game. This is really the last thing that I need right now, and I'm pretty sure that he's still trying to get into my head and mess with me because he thinks he's going to lose. I mean, that must be the case if he's so desperate all of a sudden. He knows he's going to lose and is trying to prevent that now. Update 3. Hey, everyone. We finally had the hearing today, and it went better than I'd expected. We were the last ones to present our case, and my cousin was fabulous, but of course, my boyfriend is more skilled and was able to get the judge to assign a second hearing. I won't get into the details because it's boring and irrelevant, and the more I think about it, the more frustrated I feel because there's still a chance that I might end up losing money fighting this. I'm grateful that my cousin isn't charging me much because we're family, but it's still money. I know being ethical and sticking to your principles is a great thing and blah blah blah, but right now, I don't feel so good about the fact that there's going to be a second hearing. We've managed to collect all the evidence we could find to strengthen our case, but unfortunately, so did they, probably with their slimy and unethical ways. They definitely had to bribe some people, I know that for a fact. Anyway, I was in a foul mood when I was waiting for my cab to arrive, and then my ex decided to speak to me and make it worse. I wasn't even looking at him and was trying my best to ignore him, but I didn't have my AirPods with me, so I couldn't exactly ignore his voice. He told me that Chris's dad had decided to cut him off after the accident because that had been the last straw, and now he was totally on his own. He was down to the last few thousand in his account and really couldn't afford to pay me the amount I was asking for, which is why he'd asked me to settle out of court and settle for way less than what I claimed. I pretended not to hear him, but he went on and on about how I needed to have a heart and that it was unlike me to be so greedy. After a while, I just snapped and told him that I did have a heart, but I prefer to save it for people who deserve it, and his friend Chris most certainly did not. Worst comes to worst, his parents would take him back and pay me the amount instead. I'm sure the parents who raised this man-child would make sure that their son didn't go to jail over something so petty, and anyway, his uncle was rich enough to make things happen, which is how they got a second hearing. But I didn't have the luxury to rely on other people to bail me out of trouble constantly, so neither was I being heartless, nor was I being greedy. I was just looking out for myself, and just because I wasn't constantly running after money like my ex didn't mean that I wasn't in need of it. He then stared at me and kept trying to come up with arguments against me but couldn't, so his mouth just kept opening and closing like a goldfish for a few seconds, and finally, after half a minute, my cab arrived, and I left him standing there. I'm not entirely happy with how today went, but at least I got to chew my ex out, so that was a win for me. Now I just hope we can wrap this up by the next hearing. Update 4. Hi, so it's been 3 weeks, and yesterday I finally received the amount that was due. Just as predicted, Chris's parents stepped up at the very last minute and bailed him out yet again, but it doesn't matter because at least the verdict was in my favor. What was interesting is what happened after the judgment. I went home, and unlike the previous day, my ex didn't try to stop me and talk to me outside of court and instead decided to wait until we got home. A few hours after I'd come home, he showed up at my door with a bouquet of roses and asked me out. He said that he was truly apologetic about everything that he'd said and done so far and that he always knew he was going to lose, which is why he'd been such an egotistic idiot. But he'd realized that he was being stupid and now wanted me to give him a second chance. I did what anyone in my place would have done and slammed the door shut right in his face. He tried to talk to me, but I told him that I had no interest in entertaining him and his fake apologies, so he could save his breath and just leave. The ego trip he'd been on before he lost such a petty case today was the real him, and I didn't want to wait around for him to get worse. He was unethical and cold, and I don't think that's what I'm looking for in a partner at all. In fact, I really don't think anyone is, so he needed to leave me alone now and regret his decision on his own time instead of trying to argue with me, or else I would report him to the cops. He left without another word, and I'm hopeful that he won't come back or try to contact me later on. Now, I told his sister all about it, and she supported my decision wholeheartedly. She told me that her parents were still not willing to speak to him, and neither had he apologized to them, which was no surprise because his dad was also a well-respected lawyer in his prime and was better than him and had taught his son all that he knew. He's just an ungrateful a-hole, and I'm glad I finally took the blindfold off and saw him for what he truly is. Now I'm just going to move on, and hopefully, I'll be better soon, both physically and emotionally.